Episode 1. The confession no one was supposed to hear. They say every church has one moment it was never built to hold. For Saint Marcia de Lawless, that moment entered at 11:59 p.m. Wearing black gloves and a veil that moved without wind, Father Miguel was already locking the front doors. The candles had burned low. Rain tapped gently against the stained glass windows, as if even the sky feared being allowed tonight. That's when she appeared, not through the entrance, not from the side chapel, just there, standing at the edge of the pews like a shadow that had taken shape. No sound, no scent, just presence. She wore black from head to toe, her veil draped past her knees, her hands gloved, and yet her voice when she spoke was clear. "Father, I need to confess before the day ends." Father Miguel hesitated. Everything in him told him to say no, but something else, something older than his fear, made him nod. She entered the confessional. He followed, and what she said was never recorded, was never written, was never meant to be heard by mortal ears. No one knows the exact words, but this much is certain. After 3 minutes, Father Miguel stopped breathing. Not dead, not unconscious, just still, as if the air around him refused to move. And outside the confessional, in the dim candlelight, the statue of the Virgin Mary carved in white marble, untouched since 1843, began to cry. Not tears, blood, thick and low, flowing from the corners of her eyes, trickling down her cheeks, soaking into the hem of her robe. The candles hissed. A wind swept through the chapel with no source, and the church bells began to toll 12 times, though no one was pulling the rope. When Father Miguel finally emerged, he didn't speak, he didn't blink, he simply fell to his knees, eyes wide, and whispered, "That was no woman. She was gone." No footsteps, no door opened, but in the confessional, carved into the wood where her hands had rested, were 5 words burned deep. She confessed what God buried, and on the floor beneath the statue, where the blood had pooled, a single white glove, still warm. When the Rome soul confesses, the heavens don't forgive, they bleed. Episode 2. The priest who locked the church and lost his mind. He locked the doors to keep the evil out, but when the bells rang at midnight without hands, and blood dripped from heaven's eyes, he realized he had locked it in. For 3 days, Father Miguel didn't speak, not to the bishop, not to the doctor, not even to God. They found him sitting on the chapel floor, facing the statue of the Virgin, his lips moving but no words coming out. His fingers clutched a rosary so tight, the beads had left bruises. They asked him what the woman had confessed. He simply shook his head violently, as if the question itself caused pain. On the second night, they sedated him. On the third, he awoke screaming. Her voice didn't echo. It went down, down. They strapped him to the hospital bed after that. But back in the church, the mystery deepened. Despite being locked, the confessional was open every morning. Fresh footprints appeared inside. Blood from the Virgin's statue continued to seep. And now, it wasn't just from the eyes. A thin crack had formed at her throat, and it was widening. Sister Anna, the youngest nun, swore she heard humming at 3:33 a.m. Not angelic, not human, just above a whisper, behind the walls. She tried to record it, but the playback only caught one word: return. Meanwhile, Father Miguel began drawing, with charcoal, with blood, with his fingernails. When they took everything else away, he filled the hospital wall with images. A faceless woman in a veil, the Virgin statue bleeding from the chest, and behind it a book with no title, pages sewn shut with thorns. When the nurse finally removed his restraints to clean him, Miguel grabbed her hand, looked her dead in the eye, and said, "She wasn't confessing to me. She was confessing to someone listening through me." And now he knows that we heard. That same night, every crucifix in the hospital turned upside down. And outside Miguel's room, written on the window pane condensation, "You should have sealed the booth." What if the real sin wasn't what she confessed, but who listened before the priest ever did? Episode 3. The diary that shouldn't exist. Some books are meant to be read, some are meant to be burned, but this one was meant to be forgotten. And yet, it returned. Sister Anna found it beneath the floorboards of the sacristy, a small black leather diary, untouched by time. It lay perfectly centered between the broken tiles. as if placed there carefully, as if returned. No name, no title, no symbol on the cover, just a single tear-shaped stain on the bottom right corner. She opened it. The first page was blank, so was the second, but on the third, something appeared. One sentence, written in red ink, or perhaps something darker. The moment she spoke, heaven remembered what it chose to forget. Anna's hands trembled. The ink shimmered slightly, as if alive, as if reading her back. The diary should have been impossible. Father Miguel never kept one, and the handwriting didn't match any of the church records. Worse yet, he changed. When Anna showed it to Bishop Herrera the next morning, the page had been rewritten. New sentence, same line space, but now it read, "He who opens this book opens the wound between stone and spirit." The bishop, furious, locked it in the archive vault. He ordered Anna not to speak of it again, but the diary didn't stay locked. That night, the vault's door was wide open. The diary Saturday in the center of the altar. This time, 2 pages were filled, not with words, with drawings. The Virgin statue, cracked open, hollow inside, and curled within the cavity. A veiled figure, crouched in a fetal position, watching, bleeding, smiling, beneath the image. A final sentence burned itself onto the paper as Anna read. The confessional is not a box for sin. It is a mouth, and it is hungry. Suddenly, the chapel bells rang on their own. 3:33 a.m. again, and from the confessional, a sound, not a voice, breathing, low, deep, ancient, and then laughter, low, female, and coming from both sides of the confessional wall. Some diaries confess on their own, even when no hands hold the pen. Episode 4. The Troy boy who heard her voice in his dreams. Children forget, but some dreams carve deeper than memory, and some voices refuse to leave once they find a place to echo. His name was Tums, 12 years old, altar boy, quiet, devout, a voice so pure that even visiting priests paused during Mass to listen. But after the statue wept blood, Tums changed. He began sleeping in the back pews instead of going home. Said the chapel felt warmer at night, safer, closer to something he couldn't name. It started with whispers. He'd wake up drenched in sweat, hands over his ears, eyes wide open. "She talks in the dark," he said one morning, "but not to me. I just, over here." The other boys mocked him until he began singing. At first, it was soft, Latin hymns none of them had taught him. Then came the songs no one could identify. Not Latin, not Spanish, not any language the bishop recognized. They sounded old, too old, like syllables pressed into the bones of the world. But the worst part, he only sang them in his sleep. One night, Sister Anna recorded him. She played the tape back. There was another voice beneath his, a woman's, singing with him, low, velvet, hollow. They harmonized perfectly until the final note. When Tim suddenly Saturday up, eyes still closed, and whispered, "The veil is thinning. She's almost through." Then he collapsed. He didn't wake for 2 days. When he did, he spoke one sentence in a voice not his own. He put her behind the stone, but her words never died. Later that week, the choir loft collapsed. No one was inside, but beneath the rubble, they found down scenes of pages, burned hymn sheets, each marked with a blood-red seal shaped like an eye. At the center of the pile, still warm, was a black diary, open to a new page, a sketch of Tums, mouth open, eyes black, and behind him, a statue bleeding not from the eyes, but from the mouth. What if a child's lullaby was never meant to soothe, but to summon what silence left behind? Episode 5. The Shadow Behind the Veil. There's a reason sacred statues don't move. Because if they ever did, it wouldn't be to bless you. It would be to face whatever's been watching from behind. The Virgin Mary statue has stood for nearly 2 centuries, carved from ivory stone, veiled in silence and reverence. Her eyes, always cast gently down, her lips closed in sorrow, her feet planted firmly atop a serpent no one ever questioned. But after the night Tim sang in tongues, something changed. Sister Anna was the first to see it. She was cleaning the chapel alone when she noticed the veil. Not the real one, the stone one. It had shifted, ever so slightly, lifted at the edges, just enough to show a sliver of what was underneath something that hadn't been there before. a second face buried beneath the first. It wasn't serene, it was smiling, no, grinning. That same day, a rumor spread through town. A young woman claimed she saw a figure walking inside the church long after it closed. She described a tall silhouette draped in something black and flowing, but with no feet, no shadow, just a trailing mist behind her and a sound like cloth dragging over marble. Later that night, the chapel doors locked tight were found open. Inside, the statue had turned, not dramatically, but just enough. Her face was no longer looking toward the altar. It was now angled toward the confessional. The bishop ordered the church sealed for 3 days. He called in stoneworkers. They inspected the statue for structural damage, movement, even tampering. They found no cracks, no instability, no signs it had ever been touched. But they left behind a note, hastily scribbled by the lead worker and shoved into Anna's coat pocket before he left. The veil isn't part of the sculpture. It's layered over something else. We tried to chip at it. The chisel snapped. I don't think it's stone. That same evening, a child entered the chapel unnoticed. Tumps. He stood before the statue, looked up, and whispered, "She's not behind the veil anymore. She's wearing it." And from the confessional, the sound returned. Breathing, closer, louder, hungrier. When the veil lifts, what do you see? A saint, or the thing she was built to hide? Episode 6, The Confession That Was Her Choice. In the confessional, there are two sides, the one who speaks and the one who listens. But what happens when the same voice comes from both? Father Andres was the youngest priest, assigned to Saint Marcha de la Luz since the blood began to flow. He didn't believe the stories, not the statue, not the diary, not the veiled woman the children described in shaking whispers. So when he volunteered to sit inside the confessional overnight with a recorder, hidden beneath his rubbish, thought it would be nothing more than proof of silence. He entered at midnight, locked the church behind him, pressed record, and waited. Nothing happened for the first hour, until the candlelight flickered without wind. Then, the door across from him creaked open. Soft footsteps. Someone entered. He leaned forward, cleared his throat. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." But he frowned, because the voice that spoke was his own. Not similar, identical. Tone, cadence, breathing, word for word, heard himself confessing his sin he had never committed. "I buried her beneath the chapel." Her hands were still warm. She was whispering when the earth touched her lips. Father Andres gasped. "Who is this?" he demanded. No answer, only breath. Then, on the other side, "You were me before you were born. You lesser before you die." He opened the screen. No one was there, just the faint outline of a black glove, slowly turning to ash. He grabbed the recorder, ran to the sacristy, locked the door. He played it back. The voice was still his, but this time, the confession ended differently. "Forgive me, Father, for I did not bury her deep enough. She is still listening." As he replayed the final seconds, something knocked on the other side of the sacristy wall. 3 times. Measured, patient, he turned toward the statue in the sanctuary. Its face was no longer turned toward the confessional. It was now facing him. What if the voice in your head was never yours? What if it belonged to something waiting behind the veil? Episode 7, The Blood That Wouldn't Dry. Some stains are reminders, some are warnings, but the ones that never dry, those are not stains. They are signs. They are wounds, still open. After Father Andres' recording spread through the rectory, the bishop ordered the entire chapel sealed, but no lock could stop what was already inside. The blood from the virgin's eyes had dried before, crusted, hardened like old wax. But now, it returned, and it refused to dry. It unwound seed slowly, constantly, a thin, unbroken line that dripped from her left eye and slid down her cheek every night. At exactly 3:33 a.m., they wiped it. It reappeared. They covered the statue with linen. It soaked through. On the 4th night, Sister Anna placed a bowl beneath the statue to catch the drops. By dawn, the bowl was full, not just with blood, with symbols, words written in the fluid floating on the surface like they were alive. Reopen, reveal, reverse. She dared to dip her finger in, and the moment she touched it, her vision blurred. A flash, dark soil, a hand reaching from beneath it, and a voice in it in her ears, but inside her, spine whispering. She is not resting. She is remembering. On a staggered back, the bowl shattered on its own. The blood seeped into the floor, into the cracks between the stones, and that's when the marks began appearing. Lines, symbols, spreading along the chapel's marble floor, growing like roots from the base of the statue. Not random. A language, the bishop called in a linguist from the Vatican archives. She studied the markings. Her verdict, they are confessions, but not from this time. Some are written in Proto-Aramaic, others in tongues that predate any known scripture. One line translated cleanly. It was written beneath the statue's feet. The veil was never to be lifted. That night, someone or something etched a circle around the statue with what looked like scorched earth. Inside the circle, fresh blood dripped again, but this time, it spelled a name no one dared say, not because they couldn't pronounce it, but because they could feel it watching the moment they tried. When the blood won't dry, maybe the wound wasn't hers, maybe it was God's. Episode 8, the woman who died before her confession. You cannot confess once you're dead, unless your sin never stopped breathing. They found her grave by accident. The town was expanding the cemetery while nothing sacred, just construction. But when the workers dug into the northwest corner, their shovels struck something older than the marked tombs. A coffin, unlabeled, untouched. Inside, a woman, preserved, as if buried hours ago. Her face familiar, too familiar. Sister Anna recognized her instantly. That's her, she whispered. That's the woman from the confessional. The same black veil, the same gloved hands, but her hands were gone, severed cleanly at the wrists, wrapped in white linen, as if she had confessed, not with words, but with something else. The bishop ordered the grave resealed, but Anna couldn't let it go. She went back that night, alone, flashlight trembling in her hand. The coffin was open, empty. In the dirt beside it, she found something strange. The black diary, its pages, now damp and smudged, bore a single phrase across every leaf over and over. I wasn't finished. Back at the church, the statue was bleeding more violently now, not from the eyes, from the mouth, and above the confessional, a new symbol had been burned into the wall. A circle, inside it, two severed hands, praying. That same night, the chapel doors opened on their own. The candles lit themselves, and from the far end of the pews, Anna saw her, the woman, the veil, the silence. She didn't walk, she glided, and when Anna whispered, "What do you want?" the woman turned her head just slightly and spoke for the first time. To finish what I died trying to say. The statue cracked, the marble beneath it broke open, and from the chasm below, the air filled with the scent of soil and breath. She didn't die before her confession. She died because of it. Episode 9, the sin that broke heaven's silence. Some sins are absolved, others are punished, but only one you is sealed so deeply that even heaven forgot it until she spoke it aloud. After the night Anna saw her, the woman in the veil didn't return, but the signs did. More blood, more words, and now, voices. They came from the walls, from beneath the pews, from the statue's open mouth, always at the same 3:33 am, like a divine clock slowly ticking towards something no one wanted to hear. That morning, the bishop received a letter. No stamp, no address, just a seal made of wax and bone dust. Inside, a single parchment, older than parchment should be, the Vatican's crest, faint, fading, and one phrase burned into the bottom, cruciatio verbi, the torture of the word. He took it to Father Andres, who had been studying ancient rites. Andres turned pale. It's not a sin, he whispered. It's a trigger, a word so dangerous. Even angels were forbidden from speaking it. It was said once, and heaven went quiet for 3 days. They say a man once carved the word into his tongue thinking it would make him divine. He died before he could speak it, and now, they feared she had. Anna returned to the statue that night, drawn again by instinct. This time, she brought the black diary. The blood that had once dried now dripped onto its cover. The pages flipped themselves. A new entry had written itself in trembling script. She remembered it. She whispered it, and the sky turned its face away. Suddenly, every candle in the church extinguished. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was pressurized, like the air was hiding something just beneath the skin of the world. Then came the weeping, not from the statue, from the walls, and with it a voice, familiar, female. It was never meant to be heard, but they made me swallow it, and now it wants to be spoken. Anara, but not before she saw it, carved beneath the statue's feet. 6 symbols, shaking, shifting, not a word, a name, the name that had once silenced heaven. And it was almost complete. What if the worst sin wasn't what she confessed, but what she remembered? Episode 10, The Blood Under the Statue's Feet. Some altars are built to honor the sacred, others to hide the unspeakable. And when the blood flows upward, it's not heaven responding, it's what lies beneath. It happened just before dawn. Tums, Betroyboy, woke screaming, not from a nightmare, from a vision. There's something under her feet. He whispered, voice trembling. She's not standing on stone anymore. She's standing on mouths. The bishop ignored it, but Sister Anna didn't. She'd seen too much, heard too much. And now the statue wants a symbol of peace, stood surrounded by dry blood circles, all pointing inward like arrows. So she brought a hammer, and during the early morning silence, she struck, not the statue, the marble at its base. 1 hit, 2, crack. The floor split naturally fast, like it wanted to break, like it had been waiting. Dust rose, and from the fracture, a rush of warm air, not stale, not ancient, breathing. Anna pulled away the stones, heart pounding, until she uncovered it, a hollow cavity, and inside pages, hundreds of them, handwritten, burned at the edges, soaked in old blood, some curled, some fused together by centuries of rot. Confessions piled beneath the Virgin's feet, but these weren't ordinary sins. They were dated centuries ago, yet signed by people still alive, or worse, not yet born. And at the very bottom, resting in a pool of crimson that hadn't dried, a single sheet, blank except for one phrase. I buried the word here, but words know how to rise. Anna pulled the final page from the blood, and as she did, the statue's eyes opened. Stone cracked across his face. Its hands dropped slightly from their prayer. Its mouth curled into sorrow, but something closer to a smirk. And from beneath the floor, a sound rose. Not a voice, not a scream, a sentence being formed. From the blood, the foundation was never holy. It was a seal, and now it's breaking. Episode 11, The Priest Who Finally Confessed the Wrong Thing. Some confessions are whispered for forgiveness, others for release. But this one was a key. In the moment he spoke it, the lock didn't just open, it vanished. Father Andres had reached his limit. 11 nights of waking screams. The statue now watched him in his dreams, and the blood still warm, still writing, but it wasn't the bleeding that finally broke him. It was the voice in his prayers. It had started soft, echoes behind his own thoughts, but by the 7th day, it had overtaken his words. Whenever he tried to say amen, he'd instead whisper, she's listening. And so, under a chapel, thick with dread and candlelight dimmed by shadows that moved on their own, Andres did what no one had dared. He stepped into the confessional, knelt on the penitent side, and confessed, forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. I don't know whose voice I pray to anymore. I don't think it's yours. I've begun to remember things I never did. He paused. No response. The priest's side of the booth was empty, but a voice answered anyway, not from beside him, from within him. Then confess what was buried in you, not by memory, by design. His mouth moved before he could stop it. He spoke a name, not in Latin, not in any language written by human hands. The moment the final syllable passed his lips, every candle in the chapel ignited, all at once. Blinding fire, no heat, just light and the sound of weeping from the statue. The Virgin's face cracked open down the middle. From behind her eyes, a glow seeped forward, like sunset over blood-soaked earth. And on the floor of the confessional, a pool formed. But it wasn't blood. Ink, thick, black, alive. It began to rise, forming words line by line beneath Andres' knees. You confessed what was not yours. Now you are hers. His skin turned pale, his pupils dilated, his voice dropped an octave. And then he smiled. From the altar, Sister Anna screamed, because Andres' voice low. Kelm spoke again, but this time not in prayer. She doesn't need forgiveness. She needs a mouth. And behind him, the confessional walls split open, revealing not wood, but teeth. Some sins cry out to heaven, but this one, it makes heaven turn away and listens for who answers instead. Episode 12, the confession that was meant for God alone. There are words the soul cannot carry. Confessions so heavy, they were never meant for priests, only for God. But what happens when even God no longer wants to hear them? The church bells rang one final time, not by rope, not by wind, but by something inside the tower that moved like a storm-given shape. 3:33 a.m., the hour the veil breaks, the hour when prayer becomes a door, the hour she returns it as shadow, not as statue but as voice. Father Andres was no longer Andres. His eyes were hollow, his tongue black with ink, and every word he spoke echoed twistiness in his throat. And once beneath the floor, Sister Anna stood before the altar, the black diary in her hands. The pages had begun to rot, but one remained untouched, the final page, and on it, a single line, confess the original lie, and the mouth will close. But Anna didn't know what the lie was until Tom's betrayer boy stepped forward. His hands trembled, his lips were stained from sleep speaking verses no child should know. He whispered, I saw it, in her veil, in the place beyond the breath. She didn't come to confess a sin. Anna turned. Then what? Tums looked up, eyes glowing faintly red. She came to confess God's. The chapel began to shake. The Virgin statue exploded in dust, but in silence. Total, deafening silence so full it roared. And in that air where the statue once stood, a shape began to form, not human, not angel, a veil floating around something too vast to see, too near to escape. Andres dropped to his knees. Smiling, she remembers now. The walls cracked, the pews split, and from beneath the altar, the ink returned, flooding like water rising, circling on his feet. But Anna did not run. She stepped forward, held out the diary, and spoke the only thing left to say. Take it back. The veil paused, the ink stilled, and then the voice. Not his, not hers. God is broken. I buried it in her because I could not carry it myself. And then the chapel collapsed in rubble. In light, when Anna awoke, the church was gone. The diary in her lap. Tom stood beside her, silent. No statue, no blood, no confessional. Only a single phrase carved into the scorched earth. She confessed what even heaven could not forgive. And finally, it listened. Some confessions are whispered in darkness, but the worst ones are the ones heaven pretended it never heard.